So as mentioned, we'll start here on page 144, fresh. Start chapter 5 at the very, very beginning. Chapter 5 is more or less a continuation of what we have been speaking about. The big theme was that when we do mitzvahs in this world and when we study Torah, we become one with God, an opportunity that we have only in this world, not in the world to come, where game is over by then. Then you're just a spectator. But here you can really hug God, as the analogy was last week. And now in this 5th chapter, the Tanya really continues to speak about the layers of that embrace and how, those layers include thought, speech, and action, the 3 garments of the soul that he had mentioned and that he had spoken about in chapter 3. But let's continue. Let's go directly here to page 144. Does anyone want to read? Chapter 4, the author cited. Anyone? Please.
Sure, I'll read.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Go for it.
In chapter 4, the author cited the introduction to Tikkunei Zohar, which quotes Elijah as saying of God, "No thought can apprehend you at all," and went on to say that nevertheless, through the Torah and mitzvot, a person can apprehend and attain the divine essence. In this chapter, the author elaborates by explaining the significance of the word tefisa, apprehension, literally grasping. In that saying, the meaning of apprehension by thought in general and the specific nature of the apprehension one achieves through the study of Torah and the unique bond that is thereby created between man and God.
Right. Okay, so that was a small introduction. Let's go now right to the words of the Tanya to further explain.
To further explain and fully elucidate the term tefisa, apprehension, in the words of Elijah, no thought can apprehend you. When a mind conceives and comprehends a concept with its intellect, this mind grasps the concept and encloses it with its intellect, and the concept is grasped, enclosed, and enclosed within the mind that conceived and comprehended it.
Right. Continue. Yeah.
The terms enclose and enclosed here are used figuratively. Obviously, the mind and the concept are not physical objects occupying specific points in space in such a way that one might be placed within the other. In the process of apprehending a concept, the mind first grasps the concept, then encloses it with its intellect, and finally encloses it. The grasping of the concept is the initial contact between the mind and the concept it conceives. The point of Chokmah described in chapter 3, the mind's enclosing of the concept, as opposed to merely touching the idea on one side, occurs in the stage of Bina, comprehension, in which the object of the mind's interest can be said to exist within the mind and be encompassed by it. Bina is not a point, but a process. At first, the mind only touches the concept tangentially, and as the comprehension progresses, the mind covers more sides of the concept until it completely encloses it and relates to its every facet.
Let's pause here for a second. So I think it's an important point because it happens to all of us when we study something, when we learn something, or even when something comes to our mind, a startup idea or just a thought, then our mind really goes through a process like the Tanya explains here, like Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying so beautifully. The process is first that you are enclosing and then you are enclothing. Now, what does that mean? When you enclose the concept, you're basically are chewing on the idea. You're saying to yourself, okay, let me see if this idea is valid at all. Let me see if there's anything to be done with it. Let me see if it brings anything to me. Let me see if it enriches my mind, my life, whatever it may be. When you enclose the concept, that's when you already accepted the idea as a valid idea. That's when you already went through that first process and you say to yourself, okay, now it's part of my clothes. Now it's part of me. Now, whether you'll do something about that idea or not, that already is a third process. That's something else. Are you really going to take that idea to a step? Say it's a startup idea. So you thought about it. You said, yes, it's valid. You enclosed it. Then you say to yourself, okay, I have this idea in my mind. I'm carrying it with me. I've accepted it. I've enclosed it, right? Now, Da'at has to come about, and that's he hasn't spoken about yet. But Da'at has that third process has to come about if you decide to do something about it. I think it's true in every type of thought process. Now, I would say that the mind stores everything and closes everything, but that's the mind. That's the nature of the mind. But it doesn't enclose everything, and it certainly doesn't do a lot with what it's decided to enclose, to accept. And maybe that's fortunate, maybe that's unfortunate. Maybe we could do so much with what the mind grasps, what the mind clothes, not just encloses, but clothes, and maybe we're too lazy or whatever it may be. But everything is enclosed by the mind, not everything is enclosed, and not everything is implemented, which is the third process by Da'at. That's just the way. There's like a filter process in the mind as we go through these three processes. Yes, Ronnie.
When the mind takes in information, there are the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov are taking it in and saying yes, yes, no, no, and arguing back and forth. And the mind is in this temporary pause of which way should I go based upon what the Yetzer Hara tells me or the Yetzer Tov tells me, and they both could be correct or they both could be wrong. Thoughts on that?
No, that's beautiful. In fact, the Tanya speaks about this much later, but about this process that yes, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov speak about that which enters the mind and encloses the mind. But if one of them wins, if the Yetzer Tov wins and says, this is a good thing, then they go to the second process. The Yetzer Tov then encloses it. All right, from the word clothing. If the Yetzer Hara wins, then Yetzer Hara encloses it. But it's interesting because the Tanya much later on speaks about this battle of the mind that happens during prayer. I'm sure you've all experienced it. During prayer, we can't always focus fully, at least 100% of the time. Now, why? Because we have all sorts of strange and estranged thoughts that come to mind, particularly during prayer. It's like the story of this Jew came to his rabbi and said, Rabbi, I don't know what to do, but my poritz, my landlord, a few months ago came to me and said to me that I owe him so much money, and it was false. And he said that if I don't pay back by this and this date, then I'll be punished. Now this and this date already came about. And I'm like, I haven't been sleeping because I don't know if I'm going to be punished or not. I don't have the money to pay him back, this made up sum. And the Rebbe said, jokingly and not jokingly, he said to the Jew, he said, is your poritz, is your landlord Jewish? He said to him, no, he's not. He says, oh, so you have nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Because if he was Jewish, that means that he would pray. And when we pray, that's when we think of all these things. Who owes me money? Who doesn't owe me money?
Mm-hmm.
So
there's another version to that.
Forgotten about it. What?
There's another version to that.
Oh, yeah, go for it, William.
This guy can't sleep because he has a debt that he has to pay. And he's pacing up and down, and his wife says, what's the problem? He says, well, I have a debt and I can't pay, and I have to pay it tomorrow. And the wife says, well, he should not sleep, not you.
That's it. Right. Let him be worried. Right. But in any case, the point is that during prayer, so as the Tanya speaks about much later on, we have all these strange thoughts. Now, the Tanya has a very simple yet difficult to apply, but simple solution to this. It says, as soon as, like you were saying, Ronnie, as soon as the Yetzer Hara comes and tries to deviate our mind to think of anything but God during prayer, then we should dochel b'shtei yadayim. That's the expression that's used in the Tanya. You should push off that thought with two hands, not one hand, not half-heartedly, but with two hands. And sometimes that's what the Yetzer Hara needs to do. When this thought starts coming, when these thoughts start coming to the mind, we push them off with two hands before they get to step two of the enclosing. And then it depends really on the Yetzer Tov and its strength in ourselves. Yeah. Yes, Ronnie.
For me, adding to that, I bring in when there's this battle going on, the God soul. And the God, and to listen and try, and I try to listen to the God soul. Should I go left or should I go right?
Right.
And I think the God soul is very important key for us as we move forward in our lives.
Right.
Listening
no doubt.
to it.
No doubt.
No doubt.
No doubt.
Okay.
I will say that it's not always clear. It's not always clear what the good inclination really wants. And usually the way the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe would say, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson would say that if it's something that leads you to positive action, then you know for sure that it's the good inclination speaking to you. If it's something that refrains you from positive action specifically, then you know it's the evil inclination. The example could be the person who has to go help someone, physically help someone. But the evil inclination, dressing up as this wise and pious sage, goes into his mind and says, well, maybe you should be saying Tehillim, recite some Psalms for this person. It's nothing bad in reciting Psalms for people, but here you have the opportunity to physically help him. So it's certainly the evil inclination telling you that you should be saying Tehillim. Yes, he's telling you to do a mitzvah. Think about this. It's crazy. But because it's refraining you from the actual positive action of helping that person, that means it's the evil inclination telling you. You might think, oh, I'm following the good inclination. But he's doing that so that you don't actually go and help him. You know, it reminds me of the biblical story of Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, who wanted to be the responsible brother, the responsible adult in the room, as we say. And when the brothers plotted to throw Joseph into the pit, he said to himself, well, I can't fight all of my brothers. It's impossible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow them to throw Joseph into the pit, and then they'll leave. And then when everyone has left, I'll go and take Joseph out of the pit and save his life. Now, what will he do in the meantime as Joseph is being thrown into the pit? He doesn't want to be a part of that. So he says, I'm going to go into the bushes and pray and fast and repent and do all these meditations, and then I'll come back. And that's exactly what he does. He goes into the bushes, prays, meditates, and repents, as Rashi tells us. And he comes back, and the brothers had left. He looks inside the pit, and Joseph is not in the pit anymore. Joseph had been sold to slavery by them. Then he says to himself, which means the child isn't here, and what am I going to do with myself? Now, this is a very good example of someone who's acting pious, is going to pray. And look, he has good intentions. He's going to save his brother. But it's the evil inclination who caused him to do all of that. Because he needed to step up to the plate, stand up against his brothers, and say, I'm sorry, you're not doing this. So the evil inclination got into his mind saying, you should repent, you should fast, you should pray. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, by the way, would use this example very often by saying to people, look, you sit in your yeshivas 24/7, every single day you study Torah, that's great, that's fine. But Jews are drowning in the sea of assimilation. These are the words that he used. Drowning in the sea of assimilation, and no one lifts their fingers. So you could be praying and studying and fasting all day long like Reuben, but at the end of the day, you have a brother in the pit. You're not going to roll up your sleeves and do something about it. That's when you know it's from the evil inclination. So it's one good tip, again, to know if you have that confusion, is this coming from the good inclination or evil inclination? If it's refraining you from from positive actions, then it's probably from the evil inclination. Yes, William.
It is said that the deeds of the righteous are done in haste.
Yeah, where does it say that?
I didn't make it up.
Right. No, we left Egypt and we were all righteous. We left Egypt in haste. So, yeah, but good. It's good. No, that's right. Zrizin makdimim lemitzvot. It says that there's people, yeah, there are quotes similar to that. Yeah, that's right. They don't wait. They jump and they're the first ones to act. Diana, you wanted to say something.
Unmute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Unmute. Can't hear you.
I am unmuting.
There you go.
Sometimes I wonder what it would be like, I'm just thinking to myself, what it would be like to actually know the language that this was written in to start with and lived in, as compared to the translations that we have to kind of jump into some of the words because they're not word. I mean, like the word garments or the word, there's other ones that we're using, clothed. Yes, there is meaning to it, but I often wonder, I don't know why, but I wonder what it would be like to study this if I knew the original language that it was written in.
Right. So the original language is Hebrew, actually. The original language of the Tanya is Hebrew. The original language of the commentary of Rav Steinsaltz is in Hebrew too.
But the original language of the Torah.
That's right. Well, it's the same. Yeah, same Hebrew. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a thing I think about. That's all.
It's true.
I put up with it because I don't know Hebrew that well.
No, but you're right. There's nothing one can do about it, right? Every translation is a type of commentary, really. There's no real translation. I don't think that exists, even for simpler texts, not Torah texts.
Rabbi, can you speak, just following through on Diana's thought, can you speak to the Hebrew word for enclosed? And are there other ways of thinking about that word?
So let me look. I'm taking a Tanya out here. Let me look into the original Hebrew. And so the original Hebrew year is so there is, I think grasped, right? So you have the concept is grasped, enclosed, and enclosed. So grasped is masig, enclosed in Hebrew year is mekifo besichlo, which really means not just enclosed, but it means that your mind completely surrounds it. That's enclosed, right? Enclosed is masig, grasped is maskil. So it's when the I think like Rabbi Stans was saying, is that when that thought has been fully accepted by the mind is ready to house it, so to speak. It's the opposite of rejection. It's complete acceptance. So it's housing it and it's surrounding it completely. Now again, if someone does something about that, that's a whole different process. But yeah, you know, and the mind is really free to decide what it wants to house or not. That's the beauty of the mind. Unlike emotions, sometimes we have no control over emotions. We can't really control what's in our heart and what's not in our heart. But the mind can control what it wants inside and what doesn't want inside. And in a way, yes, you're right, Ronnie, I think that's guided by the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, the good inclination and evil inclination. They should be the ones guiding what the mind wants to house. It's completely in our control. I think that's, by the way, revolutionary if you think about this, because that refers to all sorts of toxic things that we sometimes house in our minds, whether it's grudges or just pure negative thoughts. You decide whether you want, like, who was it, Nelson Mandela, who said whether you want to let someone live in your mind rent-free or not. So that's exactly what the Tanya is saying, way before Freud, way before Mandela, 300 years ago. Yeah. I will say one more thing, and I think that it's important to note this, but growing up in South Africa from the age of 8, I remember that there was the walls of the apartheid crumbled, thank God, and 1991, Mandela was freed, and the country was starting to march towards democracy. And then there were ads encouraging all Black children to go to school. And the slogan of those ads was that the mind is a terrible thing to waste. Now, why am I saying this? Because not only is it true that the mind is a terrible thing to waste, But I think also that very often we are led by our hearts. And one of the foundations of Hasidic thought is Moach Shalit al Alev. I think we've spoken about this, that the mind has to control the heart. The mind has to be in the driver's seat. Why? Why is it so important that the mind is in the driver's seat? Particularly because of what we're saying. Because the mind has the power to decide what it wants to include in life and what it doesn't want to include in life. The other organs of the body don't have that power. So if you are led by the other organs of the body, you'll be smacked by life many times around, because your heart, for example, won't have the power to navigate that or to drive that car, so to speak. The mind will. The mind can decide where it wants to go, where it doesn't want to go. That's why it's so important, really, to focus on the mind. I think we're studying the Tanya, and the Tanya was authored by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who really is the one who founded the Chabad movement. Chabad stands for Chokhmah Bina Da'at. And he was really a massive proponent of this idea that Chokhmah Bina Da'at. Chokhmah Bina Da'at are the three layers of the mind. Wisdom, intelligence, and I don't even know, you see some things are lost in translation. Chokhmah would say is wisdom, Bina is intelligence, and Da'at is knowledge.
Right.
Right? I think that's our bet.
That's
a
right.
big component of focusing on the mind and connecting to God with our minds and connecting to life with our minds. And always allowing the mind to be, again, in the driver's seat. Because if it's just the heart or other things, then it's dangerous.
But how important is it that the mind is in the driver's seat always, but sometimes the navigator is our heart? Sometimes we need to listen to our heart, that the mind wants to go in one direction, the heart wants to go in the other. Who's to say what's right and wrong, but to listen to the heart strongly.
Right. Well, then the question is, what does it mean, the heart? I think that we confuse the heart very often with intuition. I think that's not the same thing. So I certainly would agree that we should listen to our intuition, to our muzzle, to the signals that are sent by the parts of our soul that remain up in heaven. But to the heart, I think the heart can be a very confusing thing. It doesn't mean, again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't use our heart at one point. The heart should always come into the picture, because passion needs to be a part of life. It's an integral part of life. But
so it gets to the hukmah of the heart, understanding the heart, getting the heart to understand your heart. And once you understand your heart, then listening to it is much easier.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to listen to your gut.
Gut feeling, yes. But that's not the heart, right? That's like the intuition. Yeah. No, you're right. I think that should certainly guide. And the gut feeling, I think, is also where the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara come into play. But yeah. So the question is, how do you define that heart? I think listening to your heart, I've seen it, not to go that low. We're studying the Tanya after all. But I've seen the change, and maybe you'll disagree with me. I've seen the change in Hollywood. Once upon a time, movies were about do your duty. If you had to summarize the bottom line, do your duty. In Casablanca, remember Casablanca? If you've watched it, Casablanca, there are all sorts of temptations, but at the end of the day, they do their duty. And then you have, fast forward 30 years, 40 years, all these movies from the English Patient, remember that movie? To other movies, is follow your heart. You don't necessarily have to do your duty anymore. You follow your heart. I think that's very, very dangerous. I really do. I think the Tanya is saying this right here. The mind has to be the one in control. At the end of the day, your heart might tell you to do something, but it's not doing your duty. It's not what you have to do. It's not what the responsible thing to do. It's certainly not the divine thing to do. So you have to follow the mind, even if it goes against the heart.
And it's all interpretation of words.
Yeah. I was just going to say, is the mind the brain, or is it the interpretation of the brain? Is that the same thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, the interpretation of the brain is the process of the mind, right? What we're speaking about right now in the Tanya. So it's so once a thought comes to mind, then the mind has to decide how to interpret that thought.
And this is where I bring in the God soul. That when there's confusion, to look to the God soul, talk to the God soul. What does it say? What it's your advisor. It's your godly advisor. Listen to it.
Right. And yeah, we are led, and I know that Tanya is going to speak about this, I think towards the end of this chapter, but yeah, we are led to yet another thought. And that is that sometimes really we are not equipped intellectually and emotionally to really understand the mind or understand what's best for it. And therefore we need a teacher, a Aselecha Rav, in the words of the ethics of our fathers, make for yourself a teacher. Sometimes you think that you've reached this intellectual conclusion, again, as we're speaking about, that this and this is good for you, but maybe it's not. And I think that's why really everyone needs a teacher, a mentor, like Rabbi Steinsaltz was to me, and like the Rebbe was to Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I think that's what's needed, because very often the mind can also confuse us, especially if it's not trained enough, and if it's not guided enough by the Yetzer Tov, like Ronnie was saying. So we need that other layer.